one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item is public comment. Nobody has approached me or the clerk. Therefore, we will move on to the approval of the minutes. Were they? Okay. I need to refresh myself and pick them up. Have you had a chance to review the minutes? And what are your wishes? Any questions, comments, or motions? Been moved by Chair Gibbs, seconded by Scott Poole, Supervisor Poole. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no.
Aye.
That motion carries. All right. We will move on to consideration of easement request for WPS for parcel ID number 072-2809-233-0994. Mike, I guess you're...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in your packet is the request from WPS related to an easement. This is a county-owned property that is adjacent to the Marathon County Solid Waste Facility. This is the parcel upon which the Verity Renewable Natural Gas Plant is being constructed. So if you'll recall, and for those of you who weren't on the board last term, the county board approved a landfill gas purchasing agreement with Verity Energy. They purchase our landfill gas. They're constructing a renewable natural gas plant to process that landfill gas into a gas that can be injected into a pipeline. They're in the early stages of construction at this point. In order to accomplish that construction, they need certain electrical work done, and WPS needs an easement to do so. So that request and the draft easement is in the packet. I know that there is a question relative to, in the past we've sought and received fees for permanent easements that we're putting on county property. I think you can certainly make that request. I just would voice a note of caution on that. We do have that landfill gas purchasing agreement with Verity. Part of that agreement requires the county to take all necessary steps to ensure that Verity can get the easements that it requires to get that facility up and running. It does not discuss the county requiring an additional fee from Verity. Verity obviously currently pays a royalty amount to the county every month, and the county has a share in royalties once the facility is up and running. So I don't know how that would be perceived, or whether it would be perceived that that is contrary to the terms of our contract, but I would be concerned that it would be potentially an issue if we made that type of request.
Thank you for that explanation to my request for information. The two things concern me. One is the fee, the potential, because they are generating, there's a value to be derived from the extension of the creation of the easement for the extension of utilities to Verity. But the second one is the permanent easement nature. Is there any way for this to be tied into the use? I guess my concern is that when we encumber our property for a current, which is always a temporary use, and our ability in the future to develop that to the fullest potential, is there any opportunity for us to do a time certain easement in there versus a permanent easement? I don't know. I think utilities prefer permanent easements, but again, looking at our long-term interest in that property, the easements impair value and development rights.
No, that's a very sound point. I don't think there's anything that would prevent us from making that request, and specifically if the committee approved us moving forward with entering into the easement with the understanding that we are pursuing a temporary easement tied to the use, I think staff could make that recommendation and request to WPS and get that language finalized. I think that's an appropriate request.
Any other questions? Chair Gibbs.
So are we going to tie the temporary easement then to the renewable natural gas production? And if that plant were to change or cease, that the temporary easement would change or cease? I'm just asking for clarity.
We could draft it in a way that allows us to terminate the easement if the use ceases or changes, to give the county flexibility. If we decide we want to keep the easement and the electrical work in place, we can do that, but also giving us discretion to terminate it if, for instance, the lease terminates or the purchasing agreement terminates for some reason, then we have an out.
And one of the reasons I raise that is if you look at the Exhibit A, it sort of goes through the middle of that parcel, which could have an impact in the long term. And I would support approaching it in a manner that the Corporation Council has outlined. But any other questions or thoughts? What are your wishes?
I'll move to approve the easement with stipulations. You said that's temporary, conditional.
Please, Scott, can you use the mic? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move that we accept the easement on the conditions you mentioned, determined by use of the facility there.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion? Chair Gibbs.
So I just want to be clear that what we're doing is we're approving the easement with the conditions that we control the easement. I just want to make sure what we're actually moving, that we're controlling the easement. If the operation changes, we control the easement at that point. If we choose to enter into a different agreement, doesn't mean that we have to
Right.
not allow the easement. Okay, all right.
Is that your understanding? And second? And the Corporation Council?
Yes, that makes sense to me.
All right. Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. I want to just deviate from the agenda for a minute. Lance, you want to do an introduction?
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll have a little announcement here. The drum roll, please. But very happy to introduce Samantha Fensky as our next finance director. Today is her second day, so she's fully on board and ready to dive right in and develop the budget. She'll have it done next week. No, in all honesty, we've had a great series of meetings. Really happy to have her on board, and we're confident making a lot of continued progress, kind of consistent with the conversations we've had here. But Sam, sorry to put you on the spot, but if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, I think you've all heard us talk about before. She's coming to us from Lincoln County. She actually spent a little bit of time with us prior to being the Lincoln County finance director, working in our finance department, but comes with a great deal of experience. And again, we're really excited to have her. And she's a Marathon County resident, so always a plus. She's paying taxes to help us balance the budget. Take it away, Sam.
All right. Well, thank you guys very much. It's nice to meet you all. I'm very excited to be here. So the last 6 years I've spent in county-related government, starting out as an accountant, working my way up into a finance director role for Lincoln County, and then coming on board here.
we welcome you, and we're happy to have you join our team, and you'll get tired of this committee, I think, shortly,
Now already.
but welcome. All right, next. Discussion regarding 2025 annual budget development and policy recommendations from the committee, including review of the mandatory discretionary program document and discussion of rates and fees for departments of jurisdiction. And you all have in the previous packet, the mandatory versus discretionary programs. And again, our scope is primarily related to support departments, corporation counsel clerk, treasurer, finance, and others, registered deeds. We don't have the service delivery per se, although we do provide some services through those departments. So our many of our duties are prescribed in the statutes. Do you have any thoughts as to which programs or departments you'd like to focus in on and have additional discussion on going forward as we work on the development of the 2025 county budget? And I'll turn it over to Administrator Leonard for any other intro comments.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have reached out based on your conversation at your last meeting. You had a couple of directives. Kind of the most timely one for me to move forward on was the evaluation of a procurement position. And I have solicited some information from one of my colleagues where they do have a shared procurement position with their primary municipality, the county seat in their county. So I'm reviewing that documentation. I've also had a couple of conversations with North Central Healthcare about the opportunity to kind of put together a proposal to have that position perhaps be shared between our two entities, because they certainly do a great deal of procurement, and we do have shared positions already that, I should say, we have positions within the county that primarily perform work on behalf of North Central Healthcare, most notably within Corporation Counsel's office. So I do hope to have that information back to you. Whether I'll have it by your next meeting is yet to be determined, but I have reached out and have gotten that information, and I'm confident I can come up with a proposal, certainly for a pilot of that position, so that we can get to that point where we determine, I think the request was to determine return on investment. But other than that, if you do have any specific programs or services within those individual departments, Mr. Chair, that committee members are interested in, we can have those department heads come and provide an overview of those programs, or we can certainly try to answer those questions today.
Any other thoughts? Perhaps in the context, while it's not directly budget related, but in the context of the preparing for the budget, the whole issue of tax delinquent property and our surplus property and things, and maybe we could get a report on the NREM process and how that's working out in context of both taking title and ultimately the disposition of those properties. I think that's material to the budget and cash flow for the county. So I would ask that maybe at one of the subsequent meetings we get that update. It's also in our work plan. So other thoughts? Any other thoughts? All right, we will move on. Item 6A2 is discussion regarding the 2024-25 committee work plan, development and future agenda planning. In your packet, you have a summary of the items that we have talked about. I hope I captured the intent of the proposals. Maybe we should start there. Did the language capture the intent or do we need more clarification? And then we'll go through discussing which ones. We can't do them all, but we then will have the discussion on which ones we should prioritize or focus in on. Any thoughts? We're beginning on old page 57. So some of these are carryover items from 2 years ago. And I think we're one of the few committees that actually develops a work plan that assists us in trying to develop agenda items and direct staff. Maybe we'll just quickly, for purposes of clarity, run through those. American Rescue Plan Act, again, we have to obligate the funds by the end of this year and spend them by 2026. So that will be something we'll be looking to Sam for. I guess there's a report due in the near future as to where we are with our currently obligated dollars. And then I think there's some ability to claw back some of those dollars. I think we need to know what those are. Supervisor Marshall.
I'm not opposed to you going through the plan, but I did have some thoughts when you're done. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Policy and sale disposition of excess property. We still are working on the long-term facilities plan, but we've also begun the process of the pilot project on dealing with some of our surplus properties and working with local governments and seeing if there's an interest. And Administrator Leonard has done a good job on that. And we continue to have discussions. Tax delinquent property process in the NREM, we talked about that earlier, about getting that update. The long-term facilities, establish goals for the long-term facility and property management. I think that there's a desire to consolidate and reduce. And I'm not, part of that's tied into the plan. Tax increment financing, pursue legislative recommendations and criteria for guiding representatives on the local joint review board. I will just interject that I did get a commitment from former Supervisor Dave Oberbeck, who chaired the TIF task force. He will do a presentation to this committee on August 20th. So we will, or whatever the second meeting in August is. So he will come in with a PowerPoint presentation and break it down. And the thoughts that it would start here, and if there are policy changes relative to Madison and legislation, that would go to executive. And then the question is, what will we take to the county board? But it'll start at that meeting. Cultural competence in county government policies and in the design and delivery of county programs and services. This was a provision that used to be done, or work that was done in the goal came out of the abolition of the Diversity Affairs Commission, and each of the committees took over some of the responsibility that commission did, and we looked, it's one of the charges that this committee had. Review Chapter 1.51, county policies, and we're talking about that later today relative to the use of conduit borrowing, and then I think there's also an issue relative to the designation and use of fund balances, and we'll have an update on where we are with fund balances as part of the audit report, and that audit report will be provided to us on August 7th. Monitor energy efficiency, monitor and develop policies to reduce energy utilization across county operations. I think to a degree we began that effort last meeting by decreasing the assumption for the increase in the utility costs, with the thought that might spur evaluation of energy saving alternatives and policies. But there is a potential for additional work to be done in that area. Program efficiency, I think Supervisor Poole, you had asked that we evaluate the delivery of services to ensure that they are delivered in as cost effectively as possible. And I think we probably might want to look at what metrics might we look at relative to efficiency. procurement policies. I think the administrator talked about that, and Supervisor Marshall had advanced the evaluation of the procurement policy, benefit design and delivery. We've had some discussions relative to the direction we're going relative to health insurance, and we'll continue that discussion going forward. Dashboards, develop a process for evaluating and tracking key indicators, and I think one of the things that, again, Supervisor Marshall had advanced was looking at vacancy rates, and we can expand and embellish on that. All committees are charged with reviewing the goals and objectives outlined in the county strategic plan. Just it's there to make sure that we don't lose sight of it, and then audit compliance, review the annual audit and recommendations to determine if policy changes are necessary. And again, we'll have that audit. This, I think captures what we had talked about. Some of them are more, we will do as part of our ongoing business. But Supervisor Marshall, do you have any comments?
If you're looking, if I look at the list, and all of them have merit, but I think of ARPA as a time-sensitive one that we definitely have to deal with and don't want to leave any money on the table there. From a compliance standpoint, the dealing with if we have anything that is identified as a material weakness, I think that's a key something to deal with. And then from a cost levy standpoint, the largest opportunity we have in reducing our costs are the benefit analysis, design and delivery. So looking at the big rocks, they're all worthy of our time, though. Thank you.
Chair Gibbs.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I look at this list, I too think that, all of them or every one of them have merit. But when we put an extensive list like this together and don't prioritize, I think we do ourselves a little bit of an injustice, because then we don't concentrate and ensure that we're doing everything appropriate on a particular item. So what I would like to see us do is, as a committee, is probably prioritize these items and then bring them back prioritized, so that we can actually have discussions as to, yep, that is appropriate, the time, and putting timelines to them. Because as my colleague Supervisor Marshall clearly states, ARPA, we know we have to commit by December 31st, 2024. And so that's not a if, it's a we absolute. And so but I think other things, some of these things, the report on the TIF task force is already in the process. But I think, this extensive of a list is too much to try to tackle, even potentially in the year and a half that we have left, or year and 3/4 that this committee consists of this committee. So I think we need to prioritize that prior to actually starting to do that work.
I think the intent was to make sure we had agreement that these were the items. And then what we'll do is we'll do what we've done in the past, is we'll send this out to you and ask you to rank order them in terms of your top 5 priorities, 1 through 5. And then we will look at those and bring that back and go from there. But I think it's important that we all understand that, understanding that this is good as of today, because something may change tomorrow, but directionally, we would want to look at it. And I think what we want to do is we want to focus in on the policy issues associated with these items, not on the operational issues. So the charge will be to look at what policies do we put in place that allow us to achieve maximum efficiencies in the delivery of services, et cetera. So Supervisor Hart, any thoughts? Supervisor Poole?
Just quickly, those with prior experience on the committee, you think 5 a year, or to focus on the top 5 would be appropriate?
Supervisor Reynolds, any thoughts?
No, I agree. I think prioritizing is good. Getting them down on paper like we have them, and then prioritizing is a good game plan.
All right. Any other thoughts? So we've captured the intent. So we'll send this out today, probably tomorrow, and ask you to prioritize, and we'll bring it back at our August 7th, I think 7th meeting, and go from there. All right. Thank you. Item 6B1, approval of budget amendment to allocate up to $50,000 in the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA funds for designation in the 2024 Uniquely Wisconsin program. Administrator Leonard?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I know this committee is familiar with the work of Uniquely Wisconsin through the Discover Wisconsin arm. And Marathon County previously participated in that program, and of course we had I think a very successful suite of videos that were produced as a result. The Extension Education Economic Development Committee has kind of evaluated whether or not we would want to participate in that program again moving forward. And after due consideration, their recommendation was to in fact amend the budget this year to make use of your remaining ARPA balance, utilizing $50,000 of those funds for participation yet again in 2024, with the idea being that we would participate in the next cohort that the Discover Wisconsin program is looking to put together. The $50,000 amount, as laid out in the resolution that is in the board packet this evening, is not the full cost of the program. The full cost of the program is $60,000. However, similar to the approach that was taken in our previous participation, the local Convention and Visitors Bureau has again agreed to partner in that endeavor and is going to, again, they expressed a willingness to again put forward $10,000 to do that. So happy to answer any questions, but this is actually on the county board agenda this evening, as was alluded to at your educational meeting for action this evening, based on the action by the Extension Education Economic Development Committee.
Are there any questions of Administrator Leonard? Supervisor Marshall?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Has the county ever considered going to municipalities for some room tax dollars to pay for this program? I just know that the room tax dollars have been abundant in the last year.
I have not had that conversation about room tax dollars for participation specifically in the Discover Wisconsin, Uniquely Wisconsin program. My understanding is that some of the communities do make utilization of some of those room tax dollars for similar programs that the Discover Wisconsin folks put together. I believe, in fact, that the city of Wausau had a targeted program that I believe Discover Wisconsin produced for them. But I have not relative to this program. I think certainly if the county wishes to continue this approach of trying to stimulate tourism through the use of county funds, it would make sense to figure out what that partnership or shared lift would be and then have that conversation with municipalities. But I have not to this point.
Supervisor Hart?
I would have a question then on, because I clerk for the Room Tax Commission for the city, and I don't know if room tax dollars can be given to other governments. So that's a question that I think needs to be answered before we go down that road. Because in the time that I've done it, which is about a year now, it's always given to the organizers of a specific event, specifically for marketing outside of 90 miles of the immediate area. So if we were to explore that, I'd like to know if we can do that in the first place. Thank you.
Supervisor Marshall.
I guess I would assume that there could be a conglomeration of people paying Discover Wisconsin, so the payment wouldn't necessarily be made to the county. But if we went 50-50 and we paid Discover Wisconsin separately, would be another way to look at it. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Chair Gibbs.
Yeah, I think that's a great opportunity potentially to look at for if we want to continue in 2025. I think what the Triple EDC committee was recommending and is on the board floor for action, because they did move it to the full board, was utilizing 50,000 of ARPA for this year. And then we could have those discussions about potential opportunity to have those discussions with room tax dollars potentially for if we continue in 2025.
Any other discussion? Again, I would second or concur with the comments that Chair Gibbs made. I think we have the opportunity due to ARPA to do it this year, but I think on an ongoing basis, I think there's been value. The focus on Marathon County received an Emmy. So that not only did we have the Discover Wisconsin, but we had the publicity surrounding the Emmy Award, which helped promote the county in different venues than we would have otherwise been able to do so. But I think it's a worthwhile investment, and we receive the sales tax, they receive the room tax, and it's sort of a shared benefit, and we might want to look at how we would do that in the future. Any other comments, thoughts, or motions? Chair Gibbs.
I'll make a motion that we participate in with Resolution R31-24, authorizing the participation in the Uniquely Wisconsin Tourism Campaign and amending the 2024 budget as stated.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Discussion of draft revisions to the ordinance 1.51, parent 7, conduit financing and process for finalizing proposed revisions for the county board. Administrator Leonard had prepared at an earlier date a charter for a task force. He and I have had some discussions about one of the problems of a task force when you get the conduit borrowing request is timing. And they're before us. So the question is, we can use this as a model. Do we want to, one of the options that we batted back and forth is that the finance committee would take the lead, and we could, in the event where there was conduit borrowing that affected another standing committee or committees, we could invite them to have a joint meeting for the purposes of discussing it. And we're thinking about the renewable natural gas request that we had relative to, I forget the name of the company, but basically the Vandergeest Farm. We, I think, adopted the initial resolution, and they haven't come back. But I think that, there were some concerns from a workload perspective, a neighborhood perspective, environmental perspective, and there sometimes is the opportunity to have it run through committees and take some time. There's other times where it's time sensitive. Any thoughts on how we would deal with this? We tend not to do it very often. We've done conduit borrowing for Bug Tussle. We've done conduit borrowing for, was it Foremost Foods? Foremost Foods a few years ago.
Quite a few years ago.
Yeah, long time ago. I think when Chair Gibbs and I first got on the county board, so back in the 1700s. Any thoughts? Chair Gibbs.
Yeah, I liked the draft, although I do see the limitations that a task force, creating a task force, getting the membership approved by the board, and then, calling meetings and, of an additional meeting of a task force. If the item is not time sensitive, I think that is a good approach. However, when we have items that are much more time sensitive, getting a task force approved, get it formulated, and getting it to do the specified outcomes that we've mentioned in the draft here might be time consuming and might be a hindrance. So I think if we had the flexibility to allow the HR Finance Committee to take lead with the questions that are asked, if there's a time sensitive item, versus if it's not time sensitive, then allow the task force to create it. Is that, I would ask Mike if that's even possible to draft it that way.
I was going to be snarky and say anything is possible.
Is it doable?
Is it realistic?
I think it's doable. I just am hesitating because usually I can formulate an idea in my head of how it's worded, and right now it's escaping me, but it's certainly something we could try to put pen to paper on.
I guess the other thing you could do is just have it go to the full board and have the board suspend the rules and allow HR Finance to take it over if that is time sensitive.
Administrator Leonard?
Just listening to the conversation, as alluded to by Chair Robinson, he reached out and offered kind of that perspective. Perhaps because this isn't an overly time-sensitive item, to Mike's point, we can take back, we know what this draft would provide for how it is worded that would allow for the creation of a task force. If we go back and Mike and I can alter this and present you with kind of option A and option B, and option B would be the HR Finance lead approach while still trying to get at some of the things that were in this area, and as well as any other comments you might have here today, and we can bring it back at a future meeting. Maybe that gives you two things to react to and kind of see the differences. Making sure we answer all the questions that you've previously raised relative to conduit financing. Other than I think what is not in this draft, as I recall, is something that you raised at a previous meeting in your discussion, which was, what do we do if we are going to have proceeds that come from conduit financing, serving as the conduit, as is in the case with respect to Bug Tussle? My sense is, based on your last discussion, I think it was very apropos, that you delineate or get some direction from a standing committee and ultimately make a decision. What do you do with that revenue? Is it general purpose revenue that is receipted in the general fund? Or, for example, I can certainly foresee some circumstances, perhaps Bug Tussle, the conduit financing agreement that you previously entered into, Bug Tussle is a good example of that, where there is some level of risk to the county in the event of default, that those funds should somehow be set aside in a segregated or be viewed as a segregated or restricted within your reserve, so that you're not relying upon those funds for ongoing operations, and then the funds, not only the revenue be lost, but also have the flip side of that, which is the liability of servicing the debt long term. So we can add that component if that's something you want to at least make sure that the committee, the HR Finance Committee and/or the task force in option A would evaluate those and bring those back to you as two kind of competing drafts for you to consider.
So a question for Mike. relative to the timing between the initial resolution and the final resolution, there are some time limits that are prescribed in the statutes and other procedures. How much time do we typically have? You recall?
Without looking at the statute, which is always dangerous, for some reason 90 days seems to pop in my head, but give me a few moments to review.
Is that the maximum, or sort, I know that there's a TEFRA hearing that has to be held, and there are other components to it. So I guess I would ask that when we're rewriting it, look at, we don't have to have all of the answers at the initial resolution stage. What core information would we want at the initial resolution, and what information would we need at the time of the final resolution? And the initial resolution, if you recall, requires a majority vote of the board. The final vote requires a 3/4 vote of the county board. So I think if we could look at it from the perspective of what information at what timelines, that might be helpful and negate some of that time-sensitive concern. Because if we don't need it at the initial stage, but we do need it at the final stage, we would have more time to bring in other parties. Other thoughts? Cody or Supervisor?
Thank you. Speaking on limitations, another thing that I have concerns about with this is the possibility of a project kind of being stopped by, if the county board votes down the creation of a task force itself, then what happens to the conduit borrowing? Does it just stop under this ordinance change and then it doesn't move forward at all? And then the other question is, last time we created a task force in the previous session, it took 2/3 majority of the board. So are we now subjecting to conduit borrowing a 2/3 majority just by the fact that we have to create a task force in order to do anything? So I think what I'm asking here is there to be a mechanism in place in order to keep the project moving forward without creating a task force? I think a task force is a great idea to discuss the merits, but what we found is that it's usually the end goal of a task force, not the merits of whether a task force should be created or not. So I have concerns about that.
So Michael, that gets into the whole issue of Chapter 1 versus Chapter 2 of the County Code of Ordinance. And is there a mechanism by which 1.517 would be done outside of the Chapter 2 task force?
Yes, we would have to be very specific in how we write it to make it clear that we're accepting the creation of task forces under this specific section, if that's the intent, from the 2/3 majority requirement for an amendment of our rules. I would strongly recommend that we say either way. If we go down this road and want to tie this to a task force, that we be specific on what the vote is, so that in 30 years when someone's trying to interpret this, they have the answer pretty clear.
Other concerns or issues that you'd like to see evaluated, addressed, options? So we've got the two-tiered approach. I think if we can get clarity just on that time frame to help us with the understanding of when we need to, how much time we have to review, consider, and respond. Any other thoughts? I know Supervisor Lemmer had strong concerns on this issue. We'll make sure we touch base with her to try to get her concerns raised and, in time to bring back the next draft. Anything else? If not, we'll look for administration to develop a A proposal for consideration at a future meeting. All right, review of budget, process timeline, and upcoming work. Again, the assumptions are on the agenda for this evening. We have the capital improvement plan recommendations will be coming in August to take to the county board as a draft.
Yep, I put it up on the screen. To your point, Chair Robinson, the resolution approving that preliminary 2025 CIP projects will be in August, so it will go to the full board, and I believe that August 20th date with a presentation on the 15th. So Chris and I will review that list that he and his team have put together. Then in terms of operating budgets, we're at that point following the board's adoption of whatever the budget assumptions are that come out tonight. After the meeting, we'll build those in through our budget process with the departments, and we have those meetings scheduled. So then it's a real staff-heavy process moving forward. We hope to get those preliminary net new construction numbers in August, and we'll report back to this committee on where those come in. So everyone walk around with your fingers and toes crossed until we get those preliminary numbers back. And we'll continue to have other conversations relative to the budget assumptions. As we get better information, we'll update this committee. But right now, it's once those assumptions are built, we really start on the staff side to sit down and have those conversations about, in light of the budget priorities and in light of the assumptions, and in light of the conversations that are happening at the standing committee level relative to the mandatory and discretionary program list and the direction relative to nonprofit funding, putting that budget together to deliver to the county board.
Any questions? If not, we had a long list of items for potential consideration today, and several of them just didn't, we didn't get the responses or information needed, which means we've kicked the can down the road. And we will have in August some lengthy meetings. Just to put it in perspective, the August 7th meeting, we will have the capital improvement plan, we will have the audit presentation, and we want to make sure that we give adequate time. We'll try to get that out as soon as we get it for you to review, in addition to a link in the packet. We will continue discussions relative to insurance. I know we'll have a request for funding for a highway culvert from the Highway Department. Jim Griesbach had called earlier today. And we'll have the work plan, and I think we need to have that update in the discussion on ARPA, because that's material to our discussion on the capital improvement plan and where we might be going with that. So we'll look at those and some other operational items for that 7th. We have a presentation was made to the Infrastructure Committee relative to the need for a new highway facility. That will be coming in the near future. I'm not sure. We'll try to plug it into a meeting where we can manage the agenda. The August 20th meeting, we will then also have the presentation on the tax increment finance task force, their report, and I know Supervisor Marshall is a member. And I think that will be a healthy discussion on terms of what do we do next, and what are the policy issues associated with the county board, and what are the policy recommendations we might want to make to both the Joint Review Board, other local government entities, and the state legislature. So I would imagine that discussion will be ongoing for a while, but I look forward to the presentation. Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we receive the audit report, is that the same meeting that John Rader will be presenting at? Thank you.
Yes. Yes, and Administrator Leonard and I will meet with him.
Sure, we're going to try to, excuse me, as soon as we get that information, make sure it gets out to you. But we just tried to find time on John's calendar of your existing meetings, what worked with his, and the 7th was that wonderful date.
So we have to have it done by the end of the month.
Correct. The audit by statute is due by the 31st, and then, like I said, John's calendar, he's unavailable on the 20th, so the 7th worked well.
Any other thoughts for upcoming meetings? And we also have potential issues relative to the bargaining with the sheriff's department, the protective employees going forward. And that is somewhat in question relative to the recent Supreme. And position, yes, and so there's no shortage of work. So we're letting you out early today. Anything else? If not, that next meeting is on August 7th. And what are your wishes relative to item 9? Moved by Supervisor Hart, second by Chair Gibbs to adjourn. All those in favor of adjournment will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. Thank you all for your attendance. What is going on here?